Alright guys, let's do this. I got this wet palette right here. This is actually a purchased item. This is from Redgrass Games. I'm pretty happy with this. You can make your own at home. There's lots of people who do it online. I'm going to show you how I use this one. We're going to fill it up with water so that that spongy foam takes on as much moisture as possible. It is recommended to use cool water. Now, I'm just going to push it in there, let it, squish it up with my fingers. This is a technical term. We're gonna let it just do its thing. I'm gonna get rid of the excess. Don't worry, that's too much water for my taste. So I'm just gonna dump enough out until the minimum amount of water that crests the surface of this, like it's almost flush, right? I don't want the water level to be higher than the foam. I want it to be about the same as the foam. It'll last for days. Sometimes I've gone away for a week and come back and like my paint was still fine here. So it's looking pretty good. It's pretty absorbed. Mine's seen some use. It's got paint stains on it and shit like that. But I'm happy with that. Now you use parchment paper. That's the situation, okay guys? So they come with pre-cut to the right shape and size parchment paper. You get like 100 of them. Now it will curl on you, even if it's cool water. So I just hold it with my fingers for a few seconds like this and it will flatten itself out. Now the interesting thing about the Everlasting Wet Palette from these guys is that it's treated with like a chemical to fight mold. I have also heard from people that you can use copper, just simply copper. So now I'm going to just put a little bit of brown on here. I'm going to show you how I use my wet palette. And hopefully this will enlighten people who have never used one to what it is and what the powers are. So I'm just going to spread out some of this. I use a little flow improver, as you can see here. I put a little bit on the palette. Okay. Now, you try not to get too much moisture on top of the paper. You want it to be absorbed through the sponge. But I like to put a little flow improver. It's basically going to be a drying retardant and a flow aid here in this situation. I use it a lot. Now you can use this as a great tool for glazing. Some people have asked, like, you know how I keep referencing this tool when glazing. So look, I got this cultist. I use him in a lot of my private classes. The last class we did some weird sketchy white pattern on his feet. Now I'm just going to kind of just glaze some of this brown over and show you how it's going to stay thin. It's going to cover it. We've done dozens of videos on glazing, but what's important here is the whole time we're working, that water in that sponge is keeping our paint perfect. It's not going to dry out, nothing. It's still there. Now I'm going to add just a little bit of a darker brown, an umber. I'm going to get a little pile going there so I can draw from two. And this kind of just shows you day to day. I start a new project with new colors. I'll put this thing out. And I will keep this wet palette with this configuration of colors on it for the entire length of the project. They'll never dry out. Maybe just the thinnest parts will, but you can always pull from that big pile that we laid on there. So now we're mixing up some of this dark stuff because I know I'm going to need to go back and forth during this project because I want to glaze some of these browns and over that white effect we have on the boot, and I want to bring it back to a leather. And I'll use some of the brightness of that white to show through these browns to give us a cool little highlight. And we're going to add to it. Okay. Pretty standard operating procedure for me in my Beats Lab. So you see it's drying up. We've talked about it many times in glazing videos. We got to let that glazing, those coats dry. We're almost washing at this point, but it's so thin, it's so transparent. So it's kind of a juicy glaze. We're gonna push it around. We're just gonna let it tint this weird sketchy white that we did in the boot. I can't remember why we did it. There was a reason. It was a private class. Now I'm just gonna repair it. And we're just gonna let it dry, creep some more of that brown in, maybe a little bit less moisture, and just fuzz the border out between this white and this brown. Now this brown is suddenly a tea-stained white, as you can see. And we're not gonna let it pull up anywhere, but we're gonna let it stay pretty loose. It's low stress. The wet palette, like I said, is gonna be keeping all these paints wet and moist and readily accessible throughout this little task that we have set for ourselves. It's a great tool. I would strongly recommend getting a wet palette. Anyone out there? Now, lay down, just dabbing in, using some light brush pressure. We're just going to let it just do its thing. You can see it's almost like a wash the way we're using it here, the way we're deploying it. With the glazing technique, it's typically desirable when you start getting to the high level stuff to touch your bristles to maybe a paper towel to absorb the excess moisture, so you're working with just pigment. So here's what we got. You can see it's still super wet. Some of the paint looks like it's separating, and it might be, but you could just swirl that back together because it's not drying. I'm gonna grab a little ivory, put it down on the palette, and now I can pull either one of my browns into this ivory, create a highlight. Pretty easy. We got some flow improver on the palette still, and we can always still just reach for that flow improver. I'm gonna downgrade my brush size, pull a little of this ivory into some of this original light brown right here, get ourselves a nice highlight going, grab some of that flow improver. I got 2 little piles of it, thin it down, and then we're gonna just begin glazing this in. You know, kind of a combination of a glaze kind of wet blend from here on out, or some people will call it like maybe a 2-brush blend, where one brush would have the pigment, the other brush would just have the medium. I'm kind of sitting in between those techniques, the way I like to move back and forth. So we got a good little blend here. See, it's looking nice. We got a secondary pile being established that's going to be thinner than the standard pile. We'll call that the prime pile right there, where it's much thicker and much less moisture. And now we're going to take this smaller, this is an 00 bomb wick, and we're going to just start slicing in and blocking in some of the highlights on those ridges and almost kind of redoing some of that stuff that was there initially. But this is going to be feathered in and blend in very well with the brown, since we did add brown to the ivory, and we're making nice little streaks. We're kind of just following the natural contour of the boot, staying real wet, and we're confident because we know that every time we dip back in over here, all of our other colors are still nice and loose. They're not drying on us. We're going to grab some of the darker brown, pull that into the ivory, make another color, like another version of a highlight that would blend into what we just did, into our new blocked in kind of aggressive areas. You see, now we can kind of go back to a little bit of the shade, but still it's a new color. It's got that ivory in it, and instantly you see we're just getting some new fun little transitions. It's so easy. Grab a little bit more of that ivory, sneak back in here, build it up. It's got a little bit of that darker brown still on the brush, going back and forth, and we're not even letting this stuff dry. We're working fast enough that we can work off of the wet edges and just keep messing with it. There will be a moment when you can't do any more, but this typically is only going to be possible because we're not back to that super glaze where it's just dirty paint water. We're just basically working with real thin paint right now. And now we can go back and forth. The flow improver is going to slow the dry time down substantially, giving us plenty of time to mess with it. But once I like what I see, that's when I'll put it down for a minute, let it dry up. Super simple, low stress style of painting when you got your wet palette on deck. It's got lots of great little straps and little borders and frames on this leather boot. We're just gonna do some quick little dots here, kind of blocking some highlights. You know, just kind of rinse and repeat the same technique we just deployed. We'll do it a couple more times. Trace this part of the boot that all miniatures seem to have that regular shoes don't have. Like I don't understand what's going on. So you're getting something fun. You see it's so shiny, still so wet. We're still working with it. It's giving us all the time in the world to play with it. There we go. Just basically back and forth. Block in a nice little area of highlight and then feather out, soften some of the perimeter of that. It's just back and forth. And look at that. I mean, with very little work, we got some great looking boots. But we haven't done the back of the boots yet. And there could be some final highlights for sure. You could always take it to 11. Always get that heel of the boot. Now we could paint these black, whatever we want, but we're just working with these browns right now. We're just bringing some definition to the folds, to the shadows. Bringing some of the dark brown back in, reestablishing some of it, give us some nice contrast. Let's accelerate the video just a little bit. You can see we just dropped the same exact types of ripples here on the back of the boot. And now we're gonna come back in and just kind of soften them up, feather them up. This video is more about what a wet palette is for someone who's never seen one in action, what they can do. But obviously I'm never gonna squander an opportunity to slap a little of a painting tutorial in there. Little glazing 101, you know, some of the ways I do things with the cameras off. You know, like I don't always follow my own rules. I like to go back and forth. I'll go between a patient glaze and sort of a wet blend technique when I'm messing around in the beats lab. Just doing another couple of strokes here, lock in those darker browns, give us something really nice to look at. And a small little set of details like this can really help sell a model. This cultist has been repainted about 18 times in my private classes. He was actually an eBay cultist. He's been the subject of so many tutorials, so many airbrush guides, so many glazing videos. He's just constantly in a state of evolution. But since we work so thin, you can still see all his details. I mean, that man has been repainted countless times. I'm talking 10 times a month. Something's been added to him for months, since 5 months. It's awesome. So what we're doing is we're just taking the final tip of our brush, taking some of that ivory. It's not nearly as thin. We're pulling from the prime pile. It's a lot thicker, but still thin. It's not. We're not just slapping paint on there. What we're doing here is just dropping a few super crisp, final little highlights to make those ripples look their absolute shiniest and absolute sharpest. And we got something real fun to look at here. He's a good looking dude. Cultist, stay classy. And now look, at the end of the day, you just take your wet palette, everything inside of it, and you just close it, man, all right? He's looking good. We're done. Now I am gonna close this wet palette. I'm gonna wait a few hours and I'm gonna open back up again. I'm gonna show you guys right now. Well, you look at that. It's been about 3 hours, almost looks identical. You can work off of something like this for a long time, guys. Anyway, thanks for watching this video. Play on, players. If you like these tutorials, check out Next Level Painting on Patreon. Become a patron of the arts today. We offer early and exclusive access to our videos and a rewards program for different pledge levels. Patreon is PayPal and credit card secure, so you don't have to worry about that. We use 100% of the money to improve our process.